My name is Colleen Holcomb. I'm a member of the board of directors, and I served on staff with Eagle Forum from 2008 to 2013. I was in the Washington, D.C. office, and I've just been asked to share a little bit about my Eagle Forum story and to tell you a little bit about the organization. When I graduated from high school, I went to Wellesley College, which was an extremely liberal college, is an extremely liberal college. And I survived. People asked how I survived as a conservative, and Phyllis and her writings and Eagle Forum had a lot to do with that. I relied heavily on Phyllis's writings because as a conservative, I really, really needed to substantiate my positions. I couldn't get away with just giving professors the drivel that I was hearing, or I had to make sure that everything I said was backed up well, and Eagle Forum was absolutely essential in doing that. And after I graduated from law school, it's funny, I just felt like I was called to work with Eagle Forum. So for about 9 years, I would send Phyllis letters saying, I would love to come and just stuff envelopes or do something. And one day after 9 years, I got a call back, and Phyllis said, well, how would you like to run my DC office? So that's a fantastic Eagle Forum. I mean, that's just kind of how things worked. So now Eagle Forum is very much like the Marines. We're an elite group of highly trained, very specialized soldiers who go into very bruising battles and take a lot of abuse and then just run headlong into the next battle. And also like the Marines, once you're an eagle, you're always an eagle. So once I was no longer on staff with Eagle Forum, I left to get married and go into the full-time practice of law. I was honored to then come back and continue working with Eagle Forum, now as a member of the board of directors, which is a great honor. And one of the things I wanted to say on behalf of the board is we are so thankful to now be in partnership with Donna Hearn. Donna Hearn has been one of the foremost leaders, and anybody who knew Phyllis Schlafly knew how important the issue of education was to Phyllis. So like Phyllis saying, how would you like to run my DC office? Phyllis said that to me. Phyllis said to Donna, you're going to be my education issues chair, and when Phyllis tells you to do something, you run with it, and you make sure that it's done well, and boy did she. Donna has put together this education policy conference since 1986, and I can't imagine anybody who could have done a better job. And Phyllis was not only encouraging those conferences, but spoke at every one of the conferences until 2015, and just always raved about what a tremendous job Donna did, and many of you have seen that throughout the years. And Phyllis would always hold her Eagle Forum state leader meetings in conjunction with the education policy conferences, and we're so thankful now to be in an official partnership and now to have this be an Eagle Forum and a Constitutional Coalition joint effort. So we've already been welcomed, but we're just so thankful that we're able to do this together. So I just wanted to thank you so much. And just wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with Eagle Forum. When I worked in the Washington, D.C. office, there were only 2 of us on staff, so you didn't get a big indoctrination about what Eagle Forum was and why we were so great, but I heard it from the community. Going to D.C., it was just amazing to me how well respected, I got to learn how well respected the organization was. And Eagle Forum was seen among people in Washington, D.C. as maybe not necessarily one of the biggest organizations or one of the most well-funded, but certainly one of the most elite and strategic organizations because of the state leaders out in the field. Because Eagle Forum has always been an organization that wasn't centralized out of D.C. It was centralized with the state leaders and with the grassroots leaders throughout the country. And Phyllis would use events like this one and some of the other conferences that she put on, along with her writings and along with other efforts to educate, to equip the Eagle Forum leaders, but it was always the leaders themselves, the grassroots leaders, who made the organization so effective. So I just wanted to thank you all so much, and just wanted to let everybody know, if you're not an Eagle Forum member already, I really encourage you to become one. It's $25 a year, so it's a great price. And you saw in the video, we referenced the Eagle Forum report, which is a tremendous resource. It was formerly the Phyllis Schlafly report. It's now the Eagle Forum report. That was a great resource to me, and I know that it is to so many of you. You'll hear from regularly people who are like the speakers we've had throughout this weekend, and that's just a tremendous value to grassroots activists. Also incredibly important are the legislative updates that you get from our staff on the ground in Washington, D.C., and they're regularly meeting with staffers on Capitol Hill, with members of the administration, and they'll let you know exactly what's coming up in Washington, D.C., and what you need to be telling your legislators and members of the various agencies that they need to know about regulations and things. So they make that grassroots activism at the federal level extremely helpful. But it's also, they're also the lobbyists at the federal level. And I just want everybody to know, that was the position that I held, and it's so much more effective to be able to go into that position, not just being an organization, or even just Phyllis. And even though Phyllis, of course, is incredibly well respected, and to say this is what Eagle Forum thinks, but I'm saying this is what Kathy Adams in Texas thinks, or this is what Gail Ruzicka in Utah thinks. And we heard from Gail Ruzicka this morning. And Gail, I don't believe for a second that that senator was there to give you credibility. I know for a fact you were there to give him credibility. Because I know, especially Gail Ruzicka, often when we would go to meet with legislators from Utah, they had already spoken with Gail, and they want to know first what Gail thinks about legislation. So I just wanted to let you know, Eagle Forum has been so incredibly effective because of people like you. And if you're not already involved, we really need you to become involved, so I really want to encourage you. Excuse me, please get involved, sign up, become a member of Eagle Forum, and be sure you're getting our legislative alerts. Excuse me, sorry, Dr. Cotella, I don't know what is it up here. I know. All right. Well, now, speaking of effective and profound grassroots leaders, we're going to hear from an amazing woman today. Many of us who are gathered hold Phyllis Schlafly as one of our great heroes. And many of the Eagles in the room will remember Phyllis talking about going around to various college campuses and various forums talking about conservative issues, places that they were not very popular. Those ideas were not very popular. And she often got extremely rude and very offensive receptions. And we would say, well, Phyllis, how did you put up with that? And with her characteristic dismissive waves, she would just say, well, it was always the same response. I'm not going to let those slobs ruin my day. And what a treat it's been to see a very similar kind of resiliency and resolve from our next speaker. I think most of us have had the experience of wanting to high-five her through a screen as she put to shame the condescending, Trump-hating press with her always firm, yet very graceful and nuanced, incredibly brilliant responses. So we're so honored today to have Sarah Huckabee Sanders with us. Sarah served as the White House press secretary for Donald J. Trump from 2017 to 2019. She's been a trusted confidant of the president. Sarah advised him on everything from press and communication strategies to personnel and policy. For 2.5 years, Sarah was at the president's side, battling with the media, as we've all seen, but also working with lawmakers and CEOs. She staffed the president on every foreign trip. I'm excited to hear about that, including dozens of meetings with foreign leaders. Sarah is only the third woman and the only mom to ever hold the position of White House press secretary. That's right. Upon her departure from the administration, this I find incredibly amazing, President Trump described her as irreplaceable, a warrior, and a very special person with extraordinary talents who's done an incredible job. How's that from a guy famous for telling people you're fired? An early supporter of President Trump, Sarah joined the Trump campaign as a senior advisor in February 2016 during the Republican primary and continued in that role through the president's defeat of Hillary Clinton, which of course was one of the greatest and most expected victories in American history. Sarah previously worked in leadership roles for U.S. senators, governors, and presidential campaigns. In Arkansas, she was a senior advisor to one of our favorites, Senator Tom Cotton, when he defeated incumbent Democrat Senator Mark Pryor, and was campaign manager for John Bozeman in 2010 when he defeated Democrat Senator Blanche Lincoln. And in 2007 and 2008, Sarah helped lead her father, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, to victory in the Iowa caucuses and in several other states as his national political director, when she must have been about 12, right? Sarah has been named Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 and is recognized as one of the best political operatives of her generation. Sarah has also advised major Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits, including serving as a campaign manager to the One Campaign, a global nonprofit founded by U2's Bono to take action to end extreme poverty and preventable diseases, particularly in Africa. And I'm sure she'd tell you most importantly, she's married to her husband, Brian. They have 3 children. We just got to hear some fun stories, and I think we're in for some more good ones. Scarlett, Huck, and George. They live in Little Rock, Arkansas. Please welcome Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Thank you so much. I feel like I should take you with me everywhere. I'm not used to getting, certainly not that kind of introduction, and usually when I go up to a podium, nobody's excited to see me. So this is a much better welcome than I'm used to, and I think I liked this version much, much better. So thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you, and certainly that people are willing to come out on a Saturday and hear you speak. And it's just such an important organization and the work that you do. My parents have been involved and participated in Eagle Forum events since I can remember, and my dad and Phyllis Schlafly had known each other for I don't know how many decades, but I heard her name a lot at my house. And I think that you said it best. She doesn't ask you to do something. She would tell you that you were going to do something, and nobody ever argued with Phyllis. So it's just an honor to be here at something that she started and I know has made such an impact around the country. One of the things that you mentioned is certainly that most of you probably know me from my role as the White House press secretary for Donald Trump, and that is a job that I absolutely loved. Most people are usually shocked by that, but I really enjoyed the work that I did and was very proud of all that we accomplished. But the most important job and most important role that I have and that I get to keep every day is that of being a mom. And it's something I'm extremely proud of and very excited that I was the first mom to ever be the White House press secretary. And hopefully we'll have many more after that. You know, a lot of people say, how did you manage to do that? Well, in one way, being a mom was great preparation for being the press secretary. You know, my kids are, my oldest, Scarlett, is 7, Huck is 6, and George is 4. And so, one, you're used to a lot of chaos, particularly with kids that close in age. And 2, you are very good at answering the same question over and over again. You are very comfortable saying no a lot, and you're used to dealing with sometimes an unruly crowd that doesn't want to listen to you. So I didn't think that it was a negative. I thought it was actually great preparation. But a lot of times people would ask me, Sarah, how do you manage to be a mom and work at the White House? Because they're both such demanding roles. And the honest answer is sometimes we did it better than others. Some days we were really good at being parents, and then some days I probably wasn't the best mom in the world, but we tried really hard every single day to make sure our kids knew that they were our biggest priority. And I felt like the best way that I could show them why it was important for our family to be involved and why we were making the sacrifice we were for me to work at the White House was to take them with me. And so I tried to engage them and bring them with me to different events and expose them to the world that we were working in. And like I said, sometimes that went really well. And then other times it didn't go very well. I don't know if you caught my kids' ages, but they're 7, 6, and 4. And so when I first started at the White House, they were 5, 3, and 1.5. And that's a lot of unpredictable behavior in those ages. And so usually when I would take my kids with me, I would try to just take one at a time. One, because that way I got to really kind of spend that time with them, and it was that one-on-one time that's so important, but also it was really all I could handle. So when there was a big event, I would kind of rotate kids on who got to go that particular time. And we were having a big event at the White House called Bring Your Kid to Work Day. And it was a big annual event that we participated in every year. And it was Huck's turn to go to an event with me. I debated whether or not I would take Huck, because at the time he was about 4, and most of the kids that would be coming were 8 and 9 years old. And I decided, Brian and I talked about it, and we ultimately decided, how many chances will we get to Bring Your Kid to Work Day, and it's at the White House. So we decided that I would take Huck, and Brian would keep his phone and be on standby. Should things start to unravel, he could come and pick Huck up, and we would move on. I bring him in, and so far we're like midway through the day, and he's been on perfect behavior. And so, you name a kid Huck, and you sort of set a certain expectation for him in life. And he pretty much lives up to that every single day. I told a few stories about Huck over here, and so they've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of, he's a rascal. I mean, let's just call it what it is. He pushes my buttons and tests every limit every day. And so I was amazed at how perfectly behaved he had been up until this point. I mean, he had his little blazer on, his tie. I mean, we had taken 1,000 pictures, making all these great memories, and I was so proud at how well behaved he had been. So the big part at the end of the day is for all the kids to gather in the Rose Garden, and the president comes out and greets the kids and takes a picture. It's this really special time. And we decided that we would do things a little bit different, and we actually invited all of the press and their kids to participate with this event. And so, because there were going to be reporters there, I'd gone in to brief the president, and I'm standing in the Oval Office, and I'm walking him through. You go out, you take the picture, and as a reminder, half of the kids that are on the lawn, their parents are reporters. So you might, watch what you say. He naturally ignored my advice. And as I'm explaining this to him, we both noticed that the bushes in the Rose Garden start to violently shake. We're both kind of like, well, that's odd. And about the time we're processing that, we see this little blonde head pop up out of the rose bushes and run full speed ahead towards the window of the Oval Office and press his face completely up against the glass. I don't know if you've seen a face pressed up against the glass, but it's quite a sight. The president, taken aback, oh my gosh, Sarah, there's a little boy looking into the Oval Office. Yes, sir, that's my son, Huck. And he goes, well, Sarah, at least he's handsome. Not to let that be the only moment, so we step out just a couple minutes later, and the president walks out, and he goes down that famous colonnade, and all the kids start cheering, and he's excited, and he's walking down, and all of a sudden, here comes that same little boy, and he's running directly at the president. I'm about 20 yards behind him thinking, oh my gosh, please, somebody make it stop. And he runs straight towards the president. The president kind of crouches down and kneels towards him. And instead of jumping into the president's arm, he sidesteps him, goes around him, and runs past him and jumps into my arms. And the president kind of looks back at me like, this kid again? I was like, sorry. And, but the good news was I knew in that moment that I hadn't totally screwed up, because for every other kid in the world and all of the hundreds of kids that were out there waiting to meet the president, my son could care less that it was the president, and he was excited to see his mom. So I knew I hadn't totally ruined him. Huck, unfortunately, didn't want that to be the last memory that he left for all of the world to remember him by. So about 3 or 4 months after that, we were at home on a Saturday morning, and I'd been doing some work, and I set my phone aside, and I went to do something with my daughter, Scarlett. So Scarlett and I had been playing for about an hour, hour and a half, and we finished the project we were working on. I go back, and I pick up my phone, and I look at it, and I think, oh my gosh, we must be at war. Because the only thing I could think of that would constitute the number of missed calls, text messages, and emails that I'd gotten in that hour meant something really bad had to have happened. Either we've been attacked, something terrible must have taken place. So I start frantically searching through, looking at the messages, and they're all like, Sarah, what are you saying? What are you trying to tell us? I'm like, I'm not trying to tell you anything. I'm hoping you were going to tell me something. So I finally find this one email, and I realize that there's a tweet embedded in it. And I think, oh my gosh, what has the president said? And then I realized that the tweet wasn't from the president. It was actually from my account. And at some point during that hour, Huck had managed to pick up my phone and put out a tweet full of emojis from my official press secretary account that went to over 4 million people, mostly reporters all over the world. I don't know if you've looked at the selection of emojis on your phone in a while, but for a 4-year-old, there's a lot of options. And thankfully, in this moment, he stuck with planes and trains and stoplights and bridges, and because it could have been a whole lot worse. And I could have had a lot more explaining to do in that moment, but thankfully, he stuck with that. And just as I was getting ready to kind of lay into him and let him know how he was not allowed to play with my phone, and I realized it's actually Infrastructure Week, and Huck was on message, so we let it slide and figured it was actually kind of a victory for our family. The reason I tell those stories is not just to show my clearly amazing parenting skills, but the press would always, argue about all the chaos going on in the White House. And they would get so frustrated when I would tell them that if the chaos in the White House was nothing compared to the chaos in my house. And they never found me very funny. But I used to tell them that I thought I was the only person that actually came to the White House to get a break because it was less stressful than my house. But the real point is that if we want to see actual chaos and real chaos in the White House, destructive chaos, it's real simple. We allow Democrats to take over. We allow them to come in and fundamentally change who we are as a country. And I think we're seeing a lot of that take place right now across our country, certainly as the election unfolds. If we want to see real chaos in Washington, in Congress, in the White House, we'll let Democrats come in and change who we are. Democrats want higher taxes, bigger government, and that's not who we are. Thankfully, we have a president and a party that are fighting for lower taxes, bigger paychecks, and smaller government that is not trying to rule and control every part of your life. If we want real chaos in the White House, we'll allow Democrats to come into our home, take our guns, and completely ignore the Second Amendment. Thankfully, yes, sir. Thankfully, we have a president who's defending the Second Amendment and is standing up and fighting because he knows that you have a God-given right enshrined in the Constitution that says that you're better at protecting your family and your values than the government is. If we want real chaos, we'll allow Democrats to come in and force taxpayer-funded abortion on demand at any time down our throats the way that they are constantly talking about, and the way that they are ignoring what makes America special is that we value life and that we will protect it and do anything we can to defend it. Thankfully, we have a president who is the most pro-life president that we've ever had in the history of our country. Not only has he done more to protect innocent life through legislation, he was the first president to ever attend the March for Life that I got to witness just last week, but he's also appointed and confirmed more than 150 judges that are committed to protecting and preserving our Constitution. The Democrats weakened our military and they let ISIS run wild across the Middle East. President Trump and our military have rebuilt our great military. They've crushed the ISIS caliphate, and now the leader of that awful organization is dead thanks to our president and the brave men and women of our armed forces. We know that we have to be part of that process. This is such an important time in our country, and the contrast and the difference couldn't be more clear of what path we're going to take. We can either take the path of protecting America, preserving America, defending our Constitution, or we can allow people that don't love America in the same way and want to change the way that we operate to come in and do just that. I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to work for a president who understood what mattered and what was important to our country, and actually really loved our country and didn't want to see it completely ripped away from the way that we function. One of the best examples that I ever got to see of this contrast and the president's love of our country was I was lucky enough to travel with him on a secret trip about a year ago today to Iraq on Christmas night. We left Washington unbeknownst to anyone in the world that we were doing so. We left in the darkness of night. It was around midnight with no lights on the plane, completely pitch black all around us, and flew through the night and landed in Iraq at one of the bases there. We got on the ground. There were hundreds of troops that had gathered in the dining hall, waiting for what they thought was senior military leadership that was coming to celebrate Christmas with them. What they didn't know is that the commander-in-chief who was actually going to be coming through that door. And when President Trump and the First Lady stepped into that dining hall, it was a sound of enthusiastic cheering unlike anything I'd ever heard. And it was such a special thing to witness, but not just to hear, but to feel. You could tell that these were people who understood they had a president who was fighting for them, standing with them, and was going to give them the tools necessary to do the job that we'd asked them to do. When we were walking through and the president was going table to table, one of the young soldiers yelled from the back and he said, "Mr. President, I re-enlisted back into the military because of you." And the president yelled back to the guy, "And I'm here because of you." And it was that moment that solidified so much of what a difference it makes to have a president and a team that are committed to the men and women who are protecting us and keeping us free. That soldier, as the president went from table to table, walked over to me. Sorry, I get emotional telling the story. Walked over to me. He's like, "Sarah, thank you so much for the job that you do. You have a really tough job." I'm thinking, I have a tough job? You're literally in Iraq, in the middle of a war zone, defending our very freedom. You have a tough job. And he looked up at me and he reached up and he tore the patch off the shoulder and put it in my hand. And he said, "We're in this together." And it was that moment. Thank you. Sorry. And it was that moment that reminded me how important it was that we're involved and how important it is that to remember we all have a role to play. I hugged the soldier. I probably held on for longer than I should have. I was speechless in that moment, which is hard for most people to believe. But I took that patch and I keep it on my desk as a reminder to never forget about the selfless sacrifice of the men and women who serve in our armed forces and who make up the very best of this country. Because in a world full of a lot of bad guys, they're the really good guys that are out there making sure we have the ability to even come to events like this. But they can't do it alone. And they need to know that they have the support and the love of the people back home that they're fighting for. Which is why I think it is so important that we remember that we all have a role to play. Back many years ago, there was a little girl, she was 11, and at that time, her family was taking a trip to Israel. And they were going to go to all of the political sites, the historical sites, the biblical sites. And she had heard from her parents, who had been several times to Israel, that going to Israel was sort of like reading the Bible all your life in black and white and going there and finally getting to read it in color. And that was the way they had kind of explained it to her. And so she was excited about taking this trip and learning. She didn't really fully appreciate the opportunity in front of her, but was excited to take the trip. What she didn't know is that one of the last stops after their 10 days there was going to be at Yad Vashem. It's the Holocaust Memorial Museum that depicts one of the most awful and darkest moments in our world's history. And her parents had talked about whether or not their 11-year-old daughter was old enough to go through that museum. You see, it's not just your typical museum that shows some of the highlights. It actually shows some of the darkest and most horrific moments that anyone could ever imagine, much less an 11-year-old to process. But her parents really wanted her to understand why it's so important for good people to be involved. So they debated whether or not they would take their daughter and whether or not they would show her this dark place in our world's history. They decided that they would take her, and if it became too much, her dad would escort her out. He was going to stay with her throughout the entire time that they walked through that museum. They explained to her on the front end the significance and that this was important. She didn't fully understand, but she knew this was an important moment for her parents. So as they walked through the museum, she walked in with her dad, and they got to the first couple of exhibits, and the little girl didn't say anything. She just continued walking through. She started to see the pictures of the shoes, thousands of shoes that had taken off the feet of children, piled dozens of feet into the air. She didn't say anything. They continued going, and she heard the voices of Holocaust survivors who were recounting the horrific moments that they had experienced and how they had survived. The father, not ever looking at the exhibit, constantly watching his daughter, trying to decide if it was too much. Was this more than her 11-year-old brain and heart could handle? She still hadn't spoken. They'd been going through the museum for the better part of an hour. At one point, she reached up and just held her dad's hand, still not speaking. They walked through, continuing to look at the photos. At one point, there was a photo with bodies stacked one on top of the other. The little girl didn't ask questions, but her face continued to stay focused on each exhibit, taking everything in. She still hadn't spoken, but continued to hold her dad's hand as they went through, squeezing it tighter as the graphic images became more and more horrific. The father continued watching his daughter, terrified that he had put too much on her, that they had exposed her to something she wasn't prepared for. But she hadn't asked to leave, so they continued walking through the museum, and after about 2.5 hours, they got to the end, and she still hadn't spoken, which if any of you have spent any time with an 11-year-old girl know is quite a feat. They got to the end of the museum, and there was a podium much like this one that held a guest book for those who had walked through to sign. The little girl reached up into her father's pocket and took a pen out that she knew he always kept there, and she wrote her name and her address as the father looked over her shoulder. There was a place for comments, and he wondered, will she write anything? Will she put anything? Tell me if she got it. She took that pen and her childish 11-year-old scrawl wrote words that neither he nor she will ever forget. Why didn't somebody do something? And in that moment, the father, watching his 11-year-old daughter, knew that she got it. She got it. She understood what millions of people across the world didn't understand in that moment, in that dark day, that if good people don't get involved, bad things happen. He taught her a lesson at 11 that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The reason I know that story, the reason I know the impact of it, is because that was my father and I was the 11-year-old girl. He taught me and impressed upon me that good people have to be involved. It's why it is so important that we don't sit back. You may not be the public face of whatever the organization is that you're a part of, but you have a role to play. You may be someone who can give money. You may be someone who can give time. You may be someone who's very comfortable getting up and talking about your principles publicly. But each one of us has been called to do something, to be part of something, to be the somebodies. It's why it is so important for organizations like this to exist. It's why it is so important for us not to sit back and watch our values attacked and do nothing. We have to remember who we are as a country, who we are as Christians, and we have to fight to protect and preserve that every single day. Let's make sure that we go out and we never forget that we need to be the somebodies who do something. So let's leave here today. Let's be those people. Thank you so much, and God bless you. I really appreciate letting me come out today.
For being here. And thank you for agreeing to sit down. We wanted to have a little bit of a more informal conversation with you. We're so used to seeing
This is where it all falls apart,
yeah.
right here.
Yeah. We're so used to having you behind the podium, but that's right. We want to, just ask you some more candid questions.
Sure.
Thank you. Let's get the not so fun stuff out of the way first.
I thought that this was all going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, with you, I think it will be. But let's talk impeachment. Can you give us your perspective on what's going on with the impeachment process? And
I'm sure my thoughts on impeachment will surprise no one in the room. But I think it has been such a disaster from the beginning and such an embarrassment to our political system. I think it has been a huge waste of time for the American people, and something that has been shoved down our throats by Democrats to tear down a president, not because he did something wrong, but because they simply didn't like him. And they have not liked him since he won in 2016 and have tried to destroy him and everyone around him every day since he took office. And I think it has exposed a lot of the partisanship in Washington. And I'm very hopeful that with the vote yesterday, hopefully it will wrap up by the end of next week and people can actually get back to what they were elected to do, and that's serve and help the American people.
excellent, absolutely. All right, what was it like growing up as Mike Huckabee's daughter?
What a transition.
We'll go back and forth, keep you on your toes.
I was incredibly blessed. I have two incredible parents. Most people always joke, and my dad will say this, so I'm not knocking my dad, but, Sarah must get, her, toughness from you and this, and he always says they haven't met her mother. My mom is probably one of the toughest, strongest people I know, and just a truly amazing person. And my dad is the best of the best. So I really lucked out a lot in having two incredible parents who, taught me. They were the ones that were the first to take us everywhere. And while most kids were enjoying, summer camp and going to the pool, I was going to the festival circuit. And so I spent most of my time going to political events around the state of Arkansas, and I loved it. I loved getting to spend that time with my parents, and I loved getting to meet people from all walks of life. Politics is a lot like the church. We say we take everybody. And so you meet so many different types of people, and I think it really helped me have a better appreciation for a lot of the different struggles and things that people have, and hopefully made me better in the role that I played at the White House. But I was incredibly lucky to have two spectacular parents and two older brothers who beat me up a lot, which made me tough as well.
All right, that's my next question. There's a transition. All right, we all saw the negative treatment that you received. But so what gave you strength in those moments when it got to be the worst and the ugliest?
There were several things. Obviously, one of the most important parts of my life, and one of the things that allows me to deal with a lot of the negativity, was the fact that that was not going to ever define who I was. I knew who I was before I ever became the White House press secretary. And being a Christian and a person of faith allowed me to block out the distractions, block out the negativity, and focus on the job in front of me. I didn't need the critics to love me because I had unconditional love that could match anything any one of those individuals could offer me. So that alone was enough to get me through even the toughest of days, of which there were many. I also have the most wonderful husband who is truly a saint. One, I can be a lot to deal with, which I'm fully aware of, and he puts up with me every single day and has carried the water for our family and is everything that I'm not. So I'm very lucky to have him as a partner who has shared this journey and this path with me, and then great friends and family that on the dark days I knew were praying for me, supporting me, and going to love me no matter what job I had.
That's awesome. What were some of your favorite moments from the White House?
I actually had a lot. I really loved my job. And, people are often surprised by that, but I had one of the most incredible front row seats you could ever envision to some of the biggest moments in our country's history. I got to travel with the president to roughly 30 countries, and one of the things I loved about the president is despite the fact he was always at war with the press, he understood the power of the press. So he knew it was impossible for me to do my job if I wasn't in the room and I didn't see what was happening. I couldn't answer questions about something that I didn't see take place. So he took me with him everywhere. And I, sat across the table from Prime Minister Abe of Japan and Xi of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and got to represent our country in some of these big moments. And they were incredible experiences. And, but I think it was probably some of the smallest moments of getting to see the impact of some of the work that we were doing play out with people across the country. Everywhere we went, people would come up to us and say, we're praying for you and we're praying for the president. And those were probably the moments that were really impactful and really carried us through, every single day.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of the international trips you got to see firsthand, what is your perspective on how President Trump is truly viewed internationally?
Everywhere we would go, he was celebrated. He was loved. One of the things he always talked about is he wants to put America first, but he also expects the leaders of those countries to put their country first. But that doesn't mean that America first is not America alone. And we talked about that a lot when we were traveling internationally. And he really was loved and celebrated in the places that we went. That didn't mean they agreed and loved everything, but they understood and appreciated that he was fighting for his country, as he should, as the leader of America. It would be weird if he was, apologizing for America like his predecessor.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Who would do that? No. All right. Well, this is an audience of grassroots activists, and you're very familiar with grassroots activism. What advice would you give them?
I think the most important thing is obviously the step you've already taken, and that's to be involved. And again, it's kind of what I was talking about a few minutes ago, but everybody has a part to play. You may not be the speaker, you may not be the fundraiser, but everybody can stuff envelopes. I know I have done more than my fair share of envelope stuffing. And you can knock on doors, you can make phone calls. There are so many different ways to be involved that there's a place for everybody. But it's making this step to get involved, to get engaged, and to be part of an organization or an operation that allows you to do that. I think what you have here is a perfect example of a massive operation that has real impact, really effective, and has been around for so long. They know what they're doing. So find an organization like this that matches your values, that you can be involved in, that you can be a part of, and I promise that they will put you to work and find a place for you. I've never been to something like this where they can't find a role for you to fill.
Oh, we'll put you to work. Yeah. Yeah. We just learned in talking with Sarah that she has a very special connection with one of the Arkansas leaders whose husband happens to be an OBGYN. Do you want to talk about that?
I guess I have to now. I don't think I get to say past, do I? Well, one of the leaders and board members in Arkansas is his wife, and Dr. Simmons was actually the doctor that delivered me. So, my family has obviously known them for quite some time and maintain a great relationship with them. And so, very special people for us. I mean, I certainly like them, so.
So you couldn't get away from it even from birth. That's great. Well, just having been in the governor's mansion, having been in the White House, does it really matter when grassroots activists make calls, when they do knock on doors and those kinds of things? Sometimes it's easy to think, what's it going to matter if I send one more email? Does it really make a difference?
Absolutely, it's the difference. Because without that support, without the people that are out there pushing and advocating, and not only that, but holding people accountable once they've been elected is such a huge part of the process, is reminding them of all the things they said when they were campaigning and making sure they follow through once they've been elected. I think it is one of the most vital parts of a campaign, of an election, is that grassroots organization. It's frankly my favorite part too. I may, have had a little bit of an odd childhood because that was all that we did. A lot of the time, my dad ran for office for the first time when I was 9 years old in 1992, and he ran again in 93, again in 94, had announced in 95, and that he was the lieutenant governor at the time, and he had announced that he would run for Senate in 1995. And well into the middle of that campaign, the current governor had to resign over felony charges. He'd been convicted of 3 felonies related to Whitewater, and my dad became governor overnight. And so he withdrew from the Senate race, but then ran for re-election again in 98 and 2002. So I spent a good bit of my entire childhood doing grassroots. I've seen firsthand the impact that it makes and the difference that it makes. And I know that my dad would never have been elected in the first place in 1993 as lieutenant governor if it hadn't been for grassroots and people believing in him and believing in the message that he was pushing. And I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today if all those things hadn't happened.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really encouraging. Thank you. Well, aside from the grassroots, who are some of the conservatives that you see now who give you hope? Maybe up-and-coming senators or, God forbid, journalists or...
It's a pretty short list. I'll probably stick with elected officials.
Right.
Yeah. Certainly, I think there are a lot of fantastic people that are serving both in the Senate and the House. I'm a little bit partial to some of the Arkansas members, in part because of the relationship I have with them. But we have 2 really great senators from the state of Arkansas. They're very different, and the way they operate is very different, which is great for Arkansas because they really complement one another. Tom Cotton, who is such a strong conservative and has a great military background and just a brilliant person all around. He's a little bit more kind of on the front page type of elected official. He's out front more, you see him a lot, and he's a very vocal leader, and he does a fantastic job. And John Bozeman is our other U.S. Senator, who is one of the nicest, most amazing people I've ever met. I tell him all the time he's actually too nice for politics. And he's kind of that quiet servant leader that is just a truly treasure for our state and really make sure that he takes care of people. And having kind of that complement of those 2 leaders in our state has really, I think, helped make Arkansas a political powerhouse. Again, I'm partial to those 2, but I think there are a lot of people, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, who have really stepped up over the last year and fought back in a way that Republicans have traditionally not been so willing to do. Democrats fight dirty, and they can be tough and mean, and Republicans have finally started saying, wait, we can fight back too. And we've seen kind of that level of strength both through the Kavanaugh hearing, through the impeachment process, through the Russia hoax, all those things. We've really seen, I think, a lot of people step up and really shine. And I'm proud of so many different people who have been willing to do that.
Great. Now, aside from those people, who are some of your other heroes? Maybe aside from Dad and some of the...
Stole my best answer.
All right. Well, you certainly, yeah. Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, certainly my dad is my, not just my political hero, but a life hero. He is one of the most committed, dedicated Christians that I know, and he really lives out his faith. And he did that at a time when it wasn't always easy. And he was always willing to fight for what he believed in, even though it may not have been the most popular thing. He often says the reason he didn't get into politics and become pro-life, he got into politics because he was pro-life. And that really was what drove him into the public space and into running for office, was because he believed in certain things and he didn't see other people out there fighting for him. And he wanted to make sure we were fighting for those principles. And so to get to watch him and learn from him and have him as a lifeline to call when I don't have a good answer for a really tough question has been truly amazing. And I couldn't be more grateful to have him as kind of my hero, both in life and in politics.
Not bad on the guitar either, huh?
No, I certainly sadly picked up zero musical ability. I can play I can play the radio, and that's about it. But I'm pretty proficient with the radio. So
that's awesome. You mentioned some of the conservative heroes, and the people you mentioned are exciting. What are some things you think the conservative movement is doing well, and what are some things that we could be doing better?
You know, the biggest thing is to not be afraid. The left can be intimidating at times. They're very loud, and they, like I said, they can sometimes fight dirty. We were talking about this earlier. They are the most intolerant group fighting all in the name of tolerance that I've ever encountered. And they think if you disagree, then you're obviously a terrible person. And so I think it's being very vocal and very unafraid and unashamed to stand up for principles that matter, stand up for our faith and our convictions.
All right, you told us a little bit about President Trump and the fun you had in the White House. What are some things that the audience might not know about President Trump?
There's a lot of things. Some could probably get me in trouble, but he actually has one of the greatest sense of humor. He's very funny, and he's a very fun person to be around. I think people might expect that, but he is a really, actually great person to be around. One of the most difficult times I had was kind of in the height of the Red Hen scandal. That was the restaurant that, as they said, politely asked me to leave. I don't know how you can politely kick someone out of a restaurant, but apparently they could. And the correspondence dinner where I was, publicly mocked and attacked for my appearance, for my conservative principles, and that had kind of been a really tough time. And an LA Times reporter had written a pretty nasty article about me, attacking me as a mom, attacking my appearance, so much so that even the LA Times took the story down. And we were getting ready to go into, we were in Japan, we were getting ready to go into a meeting with Prime Minister Abe, and the group was walking down the hall, and the president said, "Hold on," and he grabbed me and said, "Sarah, come here." I said, "Yes, sir." He looked at me, and some of the language I'll edit, but he said, "Sarah, I just want you to know that the only reason they attack you is because you're good at what you do." He said, "You're smart, you're beautiful, and don't let those get you down." So, he knew in that moment like how difficult it had been, and he recognized it, and he grabbed me, and he made a point to encourage me and support me and give me confidence to move forward and continue doing my job. And that meant so much even in that short moment, and then he slapped me on the shoulder and said, "All right, let's get back to work." So off we went, but it was that 30-second exchange that really helped push me and give me the strength I needed to keep going and keep fighting and continue to be part of his team.
That's great. Sounds like the Donald Trump version of "Don't let those slobs ruin your day." That's right. Yeah, that's great.
The New York version of
yeah, All right, and then let's get back to work, also very much like Phyllis. Along those lines, I mentioned in the introduction, it's pretty remarkable to have President Trump say those kinds of things about you because a lot of people don't pass muster with him. What do you think it was that in your work ethic or that really resonated with him and made you so invaluable on his team?
I mean, I'd love to say it's, my charm and my wit, but, I think it was that I was somebody who was fighting with him. I wasn't just part of his team, but I was a partner with him in a fight against some of the nastiest, toughest critics that we faced, and that I was willing to stand up and not back down and continue pushing for an agenda that we knew was important and mattered to the country. And I had a great relationship with him and continue to have a great relationship with him. And it's something I'm frankly very proud of, to have done the work for 3.5 years and come out on the other side. So
that's awesome. Well, and thank you for sharing your stories. You were the first mom to ever hold that position. Any other stories you'd like to share or any other insight you'd like to give? That's an incredibly difficult position. What was that like?
It was, like I said, some days are extremely challenging and you think you can't do it all, but you're not supposed to. That's the other thing that you have to remember, is that you're not supposed to do any of it alone. And I was constantly reminded of my need and my dependence for my faith, for my family, and that I wasn't doing it alone. And I think that is something that all of us need to remember every single day, because we're going to face very difficult times, but we're also going to have really amazing times, and that we should share those with our Creator in the difficult times and in the happiest of times, and that you're not alone at all and you don't have to do it by yourself. And so getting to have kind of that reminder every single day of my need and my dependence on Him was such frankly, a positive thing and a good thing for my faith and for my relationship with God.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. This has just been awesome.
Thank you so much.